There was much more of an understanding that this shouldn't be seen to be any sort of pork barrelling exercise, and that it shouldn't be something that would be inequitable to other parts of Australia, because as crook as the situation is with the Royal Hobart Hospital in Tasmania, the situation is obviously unsatisfactory with a number of other hospitals.
None of us are comfortable with this because we're independents, and in a sense we're being asked to determine between two sides, both of whom we have no close relationship with.
They're sitting on the big numbers. They've got more options than just courting us. They could talk to each other.
We've established that they're out there buying support. That's why I was, all jokes aside, very disappointed in the Wilkie thing. I mean, if there was one hallmark of the Rudd government, for the first time in 25 years, a government wasn't out there buying votes. Wilkie thing yesterday just seems to me we're back in the bad old days.
Nicola Roxon, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
What exactly have you promised to do for the Hobart Hospital?
Well, what we've made clear is that there is $100 million available immediately so that the first stage of the redevelopment can commence. That's been ready to go, and the Tasmanian Government and our Labor MPs have been urging us to be able to make that commitment, and Mr Wilkie obviously advocated very strongly for it. What we've also made clear is that we will consider, through the processes we've used for our previous investments in hospitals, our Health and Hospitals Fund, we will open a new round of applications for that fund. Mr Wilkie and the Tasmanian Government have made very clear they will apply for funding. The Tasmanian Government announced in their recent state election that their project is a $565 million project and that they were seeking a 60% contribution from us. We have obviously made clear that we will consider that favourably, but there's a proper process to go through. We need all of the technical specifications to stack up, but we expect that they will. Now the Tasmanian Government has gone through this detailed planning process.
Yeah, because there must be a wink and a nod about what is to come, because otherwise how would you buy his vote for $100 million when Tony Abbott couldn't get it for $1 billion?
Well, look, I don't think we're buying his vote. What I think it shows is, and Mr Wilkie's been very clear that he has strong concerns and issues about processes and integrity and the way governments run. I think what has benefited us in this situation is we have a process for investing in hospitals. We've been doing that for the last 3 years. We have 32 projects already funded under this Health and Hospitals Fund program. We have another $1.8 billion which has been allocated to that fund. We will open applications if we get to form government from October this year. But as we did in the previous round, we will, through the budget process, allocate how much of that money can be spent in each budget or over a period of time. And the Hobart Hospital application will be one of those. And it seems to me that Mr Wilkie, one, was perhaps giving us some credit for having already made such investments, and two, having a process in place to be able to do it where he knows that he can get some extra confidence that it's a worthy project, that the Tasmanian Government will be, held to their part of the bargain, etc. And it seems, although I obviously wasn't in those negotiations with Mr Abbott, that he didn't pay any attention to those sorts of details.
But we'll go to the $1.8 billion in a moment, but the $100 million, where does that come from?
Well, the $100 million, as you know, the costings and the Treasury assessments of both our policies and the opposition's policies have been back through a Treasury process. They're the ones that have rather spectacularly confirmed this huge multi-billion-dollar hole in the Liberal Party's costings. What they also said was that we had $106 million more than we had said during the campaign, and as the Prime Minister's made clear, that money is then available for us to use. We've committed that. And we will, for the rest of the money, go through the Health and Hospitals Fund process.
So that $100 million that Treasury found for you goes to the Hobart Hospital, so there's no other spending beyond that in any negotiations you've done with the independents?
Well, I'm not party to all of those negotiations, as you would know, and really what I've found in the discussions I've been party to is there is a great interest from all the independents in the way our Parliament works. You've seen that discussed in a fair bit of detail, but also in some key priority areas. So, again, I think that they are looking closely at what we've already delivered and the processes we're undertaking. Use, for example, our health and hospitals reforms. Now, I heard Mr Catter saying recently, he said, look, they haven't done everything I'd like to do, but at least your government's been having a go. These problems that have dogged Queensland health for a long period of time, at least you're setting up a system to try to improve that. So I think really it's underestimating the way that these independents work to say it's just about negotiating and haggling over money for this or that project. There's actually a lot of attention being given to what our government has been delivering, what the previous government did or didn't deliver in helping weigh up which party might be able to form the most stable government that will deliver good outcomes to their electorates. And I think that's broadband, it's health, it's education, it's Indigenous affairs, it's, you know, a whole range of things that these independents are concerned about, as is most of the rest of the community.
Home insulation and questions like that will come up as well?
Well, they haven't come up in the discussions that I've been party to, but of course the independents, like the rest of the public, will weigh in their minds what it is that a government led by Julia Gillard can deliver and what it is a government led by Tony Abbott can deliver. But I mean, in my patch, there's some very clear investments that the previous government, despite Mr Abbott pretending that he's going to be the best ever for the country, that they never did. They never dealt with the workforce shortages in country Australia. They never dealt with the underinvestment in hospitals in a way that they should have. They pulled money out of public hospitals when most country areas rely only on public hospitals. Some have some private investments in private hospitals, but many don't.
Yeah, but given all those problems then, why did it take Andrew Wilkie to give you a shove to bring forward the $1.8 billion?
Well, that money was there, and there is the potential for us to have made those investments at future times.
But you brought it forward, and you needed a nudge from him to bring it forward.
We have brought it forward, but the process has been there and been able to be activated. Don't forget, we've got billions of dollars of projects that are already being rolled out. A good example of those is our $500 million in more than 20 regional cancer centres. That application process is complete. We've been able to announce those investments. Contracts have not yet been signed. And Mr Abbott now says that he won't go ahead with those projects. Now, we've got to make these investments in staged ways. We made big investments in the 2009 budget. Some of them had application processes that flowed from that, like the regional cancer centres. We've been very busy in this area, but you can't expect us to spend all the money at once and not have a staged process for how we would make these investments.
Are you familiar, for example, with the problems at Wagga Hospital?
I am.
Well, then why would Hobart get priority over Wagga?
Well, both Hobart Hospital and Wagga Hospital made applications, and the state governments made applications where they ranked their priorities in our previous round. The Hobart Hospital application at that time was for $60 million to do a very early stage assessment. It was only after that application process that the new work was done, and as recently as the state Tasmanian election, when the $565 million redevelopment has been finalised. It was rejected because the Health and Hospitals Fund said there is actually no medium and long-term plan for what will happen with the Hobart Hospital, and it rejected that early application. Now there is that plan. We're very confident that the Health and Hospitals Fund will be able to make those investments.
In
Wagga Hospital,
but Hobart gets $100 million up front. Wagga doesn't get that. Is it because Wagga doesn't have an independent member and it's not a marginal seat?
No, there's a range of different reasons. I've been very sympathetic to the applications made at Wagga Hospital, but we do need to remember that we also have to look at the state government priorities. There's a range of different issues. Wagga Hospital will be encouraged to apply for this round of funding as well. But we, at the Commonwealth level, need to be able to work in with the proper planning processes for each investment in a hospital. And remember that one of our big reforms that we've made is that we in the future will be paying for 60% of all capital investments in hospitals. So we're talking about an interim process until our reforms come through. None of that is going to happen if Mr Abbott becomes the Prime Minister, because he said he'll tear up that whole deal.
No, but given the nature and the outcomes of the talks, though, with Andrew Wilkie, there is certainly a perception that if you're represented these days by an independent, you'll get a better deal. And as every piece of legislation comes up now, you'll negotiate directly with the independents for their support on that legislation. So there's this endless opportunity for them to continue this operation, continue this process where they get the best deals for their own electorate.
Well, I think the decision that Mr Wilkie has made actually underlines something quite different, which is he's not just going with the highest bidder. He's actually looking at a process, in this instance, which will provide benefits across the country in bringing forward that Health and Hospitals Fund application. I think it is underestimating the standing of these four men in particular, that they have some interest in the much broader impact of decisions that they can make make, and as a government we might be able to make into the future for all of regional areas, or for all hospitals, or for the broadband network, I think they're conducting themselves with a fair amount of decency, actually, in looking at the impact beyond just their electorates.
Just on the broader politics, is it good enough really just to get the bare minimum of 76, or do you realistically need, say, 77 to claim some sort of stability?
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves. I think 76 is what is needed. 77 is obviously better. I mean, 87 is much better, let's be frank,
but
Barry.
76 would be very fragile.
It will be fragile. I mean, the public has elected the parliament with the makeup that it has elected. That is the hand that the community has dealt us, and it's now our obligation to make sure that we can deliver a stable and effective government with those numbers. We can't recreate that. Of course we would prefer the larger number of members voting and supporting our government in the future will make it more stable, but I simply can't predict that. I don't think that each and every one of the three independents will necessarily all make the same decision. They're clearly talking with each other, but very much looking at their own history, their background, their priorities, what they think is best for the nation, and we need to allow them the time to do that.
And how do you describe the deal that you've done with the Greens? Is it a coalition or an alliance? How do you describe it?
Look, I just think it's actually a sensible thing to do. I mean, this is not new for a government not to have control of the Senate. If we form government, we will need to work with the Greens in the Senate. Any party that forms government will need to work with the Greens in the Senate. And it is just sensible for us to say, OK, what rules will apply? How will we negotiate with each other? What procedural things should we put in place so that that can be a respectful and constructive relationship? I think people are reading far too much into what is just a sensible step to take if we want the next parliament to work effectively.
So you don't see it as an alliance?
Well, we've made an agreement with them. We've made an agreement with them primarily over a range of procedural issues so that we can have a good, open, transparent way of dealing with another party. We've set a couple of priority areas. I think it will be good, for example, that we're going to look afresh at dental care, a problem that has beset the nation for many decades. There isn't a magic solution to it. Having more brains working on this difficult problem will probably mean we can come up with a very good solution into the future. So I think it's just a sensible way of dealing with the Parliament that the Australian community has elected and expects us to be able to work together with everyone that's in the Parliament, whether it's the House or the Senate.
But Tony Abbott, though, in his letter makes a rather compelling argument about that there's an opportunity for the most Bush-oriented government in the country's history if the independents were to go with the Nationals and the coalition. And he also talks about this political preference in their own electorates for a coalition government. They're quite powerful arguments, aren't they?
Well, I think what is a more powerful argument is if you look at the history of what the Howard government did and didn't do when they had 11 and a half years in power. They didn't solve the doctor crisis in the bush. They didn't invest in small regional hospitals. They didn't build a broadband network. They didn't make sure that struggling public schools in small regional areas were sustainable. Now, ultimately, Mr Abbott can use whatever rhetoric he wants, but I would have thought that these independents are smart enough to say, what did they do in the 11 and a half years and what's our government done in the past 3 years? And that will weigh very heavily on them. You would expect that those sorts of issues weigh heavily during the election, but it seems that actually there's now more attention being put on those sorts of issues in the minds of the independents than perhaps there was during the general debate during the election.
And if all three go with the coalition and they have 76, what will be Labor's approach to this in opposition? Will you give it a go? And try and make it work?
I think that every party has an obligation to do that. I think that we take this pretty seriously. We want the chance to be able to govern. We are trying to persuade the independents that that is the best way to deliver good and important reforms across the country, let alone in their own electorates. But obviously, if a decision is made to go with the coalition, we all have an obligation to make the new type of parliament work. We'll, of course, hold any government to account. That's what oppositions do. And in health, I will be bitterly disappointed that things like the regional cancer centres, whether it's in Townsville or Tamworth or Whyalla or elsewhere, will actually go ahead. Now, we will be shining a light on that if those sorts of investments don't go ahead, but we're hopeful we get the chance to deliver them instead.
And just finally, have you got any insight, knowledge as to when this might all resolve itself? Monday, Tuesday?
Look, I think it would be a brave person to try to put a date on this now. I mean, the independents themselves are saying that they want it to come to a conclusion shortly. We're obviously doing everything we can to enable that from our perspective. I see that the Liberal Party, for example, are not yet signing up to these parliamentary reforms. That's something that Mr Oakeshott said he wants agreed to before he'll make a final decision. So some of the timing is not in our hands, but we are hopeful, like everyone else, that this will be resolved shortly. But it's just not a matter that we can control.
Thanks for your time this morning.
A pleasure.